Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are doing my 5x5 Halloween edition. So a 5x5 is my series where I am trying to find 5-star reads. I have not succeeded yet. The only time I've done this before was with the Try a Chapter challenge. I'll put a link to that in the cards up above. But this time around, of course, I had to do a Halloween edition with a bunch of Halloween reads from my Spooktober readathon. I will put a link to my TBR right here as well. First, let's start off with some of the books I'm going to be reading. First off, I'll be listening to the audiobook for The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a horror story following 4 Blackfeet Native American men in which something from their past has come back to haunt them. That's about all I really know at the time being. Next, I'm also going to be working through the chonker that is The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is the first in a YA fantasy series. I believe it's following a group of supernatural teenagers who are trying to solve a serial killer's case in 1920s New York City. Next up will be Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, which has been one of my most anticipated reads for October. This story is following Yadriel, a young trans boy. His family is a part of a brujeria culture, which is sorcery, but it is very based on gender norms, and because he is trans, his family does not believe that he can be a real brujo. However, he is determined to prove this to them and ends up summoning a spirit of the dead bad boy from his school named Julian. Next, I'll also be listening to the audiobook for Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a horror story in which we are in 1950s Mexico following a young woman who is recently received a letter from her cousin saying that she is in danger, but when the woman Noemi goes to visit her cousin at her new husband's estate, they are all saying it is totally fine and she just has some kind of an illness, but Noemi isn't really convinced. Finally, I will also be reading the graphic novel Monstress by Marjorie M. Liu. I'll be reading book 1, and this is following a young woman who has a psychic link to a monster. She lives in this fantastical world where there is a war going on between humans, arcanics, and kumeas. Arcanics are fantastical creatures, I believe, and kumeas are sorceresses. For all but Monstress, I will give you guys a 50% update and a estimated rating, and then I will give a actual rating once I have completed the book. Since Monstress is a graphic novel, I think I'll be able to get through it fairly quickly, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do one actual rating and no 50%. Hey y'all, so I have actually hit the halfway point in The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, and I thought I would give you guys a little update because this book is creepy. I know I initially gave a pretty sparse synopsis, but that's because I didn't really want to know anything going into this. However, I do think you can learn a little bit more and it won't really ruin anything. In this book, we are following the lives of 4 Blackfeet Native American men who, when they were teenagers, went on a hunt on a portion of land that was supposed to be reserved for elders only. In the introduction, we are actually seeing from the point of view of Ricky, and it goes full speed ahead in that first chapter. Really kicks off strong. In the next chapter, however, we are seeing from the point of view of Lewis, who has moved off the reservation and is now married to a white woman. They are plenty happy, but unfortunately Lewis doesn't feel that he can discuss the events of the hunt with her, and they are starting to haunt him more and more, particularly when he realizes that the 10-year anniversary of the hunt is coming up, and he starts to have visions of what he believes to be the spirit of one of the elk come back to haunt him first and then later his friends. Thus far, this book has had some really stomach-churning, grotesque scenes that oddly managed to be heart-wrenching at the same time. I know that's a very odd combo, but it's true. It's so creepy and scary in the way that I want a horror book to be. There's been a good amount of body horror, which I will say probably had me making some really weird faces, but it's been a bit since I've read anything with a lot of body horror in it. At the beginning, this seems like a pretty simple plot, but I think it kind of dives into some deeper issues and aspects of Native American life. For example, Stephen Graham Jones addresses addiction, particularly alcoholism, as well as the racism and violence that Native American people have to endure. He does do this thing where he will sometimes give a news headline based on certain events that are happening. So like with the very first sentence, it says, the headline for Richard Boss Ribs would be Indian man killed in dispute outside bar. And it's kind of sad how many of these headlines do sound like something you would read in a newspaper. Across the board, I've been really enjoying this and I'm excited to finish it out, but I'm sure we're gonna get some more creepy and unsettling scenes that will probably have me making some more strange faces. Hey y'all, I officially finished The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, and yes, I did in fact make a bunch of weird faces at the rest of the horror scenes because this book is creepy, it's gory, at some points it's downright brutal, and at first you're so focused on like, oh, this is gross, but then you think about the implications behind what's happening and you're like, oh. Guilt and grief were such prominent points in this book, and it had some stomach churning scenes that still would focus on those emotions, and in the end I really just don't know who had the worst fate because it was pretty hardcore. I almost want to call this a literary horror story, which is something different from what I've read previously in the horror genre, or if I have read something that follows under this, I didn't really think about it in the context like I did here, because I think Stephen Graham Jones just did such a good job of interconnecting all of these really serious topics into a story without like really hitting you over the head with it. This just looked at so many issues that really plague Indigenous people, like racism, alcoholism, broken families, but then it also highlights the importance of cultural identity and how it can really affect a person. Along with that, I just think it's really awesome that he managed to sort of reclaim this whole Indian curse trope and do it in such a better way that was still terrifying. I will say, however, in the end, I felt the final climax was a bit too dragged out. It was hitting the point where I was like, okay, suspense officially built, but like, what's gonna happen? Along with that, in the last 20% of the book, point of views got a little bit confusing just because we were bouncing back and forth between 3 different point of views who were all together. So it would hit the point where I was like, who am I reading from? I don't remember. However, there was a very bittersweet ending that I really enjoyed and think kind of took me by surprise because I really wasn't expecting this to take that turn. But I really liked this. I think I was right in my estimated rating and I'm gonna give it 4 stars. I do want to say lots of content warnings for gore. Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point in The Diviners by Libba Bray, and I'm having some conflicting feelings on this one, unfortunately. When I initially went into this, all I knew was it was set in 1920s New York, it had some supernatural elements, and there was a serial killer involved. So, you know, that pretty much sold me. Across the board, I really appreciate that Libba Bray has stuck very true to her setting. There are mad 20s vibes when it comes to the fashion, the slang. On that same vein, I also like that she has brought up some actual issues that were very prevalent in 1920s New York, including xenophobia, racism, but also such topics as prohibition, socialism, and even the group of the Freemasons. We've been introduced to our serial killer already, and he is creepy. He has this little ditty that he sings while he's working, and you know, that's terrifying. We did have one chapter that I think was supposed to be giving us some background on the serial killer, and there were aspects of him that actually kind of reminded me of H.H. Holmes. Unfortunately though, I think the thing that I'm liking least about this is the characters and the number of points of view. I think we've hit like 10, and there's just so many, and sometimes it's hard to keep straight, especially given that many of our main characters all have very different and distinct personalities, so it can be very jarring when we change point of views. Those who I do believe are our main characters all have some kind of a diviner ability. Evie is the one we've seen from the most, and unfortunately she's kind of annoying to me. I was waiting for her to get knocked down a few pegs, and I thought she finally did, and she was becoming a little bit more bearable, but she kind of backslid. I think my 2 favorites, however, have been Sam, who is a thief and he has a very cocky attitude, and it's hard not to like him. On the other side, I really enjoy Theta. She has a very much a I don't give a f attitude. She's also a dancer at a club, and is just trying to have a good time, live her best life, and I can appreciate that. We've also seen from the point of view of 2 of the serial killer's victims, and that made those chapters particularly terrifying. Unfortunately though, there's just so many people to keep up with. I do think that this might be resolved quickly because in one of the last chapters before I hit the 50% mark, all of our arguably main characters finally all started to meet. They were in one specific setting together and some of them interacted with the others. So I'm hoping that maybe we will start to dwindle down on the number of people we are seeing from because they'll all be together. I'm still not 100% sure on where we're going with this story. I assume they're gonna try and solve the case of the serial killer, but I'm still not really sure if I'm being honest. I think currently I'm gonna estimate 3.5 stars with this one. I am enjoying it and I hope it's going to get better and that I will be rating it higher because I've heard a lot of good things about this series and it seems like it's right up my alley. But just for the time being, I'm a little apprehensive. Hey y'all, so I have officially finished The Diviners by Libba Bray, and this is definitely the start of a series, and you can kind of tell. I mentioned I wasn't a big fan of all the different point of views, and I was hoping that they were going to start dwindling down, given that some of our characters were interacting together now. But unfortunately, that didn't really happen. We still jumped back and forth between many different characters, and with them, some different side plots that I think were being developed a little too early. I think in this one we should have focused primarily on Evie and then perhaps later should have delved into some of the other side characters' plots just because it got a little confusing, especially since we were bouncing back and forth between so many people. However, I am absolutely loving the plot of this. The mystery has me very sucked in. Some of the little plot twists we had in the ending were well done, and one of them really caught me off guard. I'm so excited to see how this is going to develop in the following books. I really loved how we delved a bit deeper into the mystical and occult portions of Libba Bray's fantastical world, and with that, I think it's really interesting how she tied it into spiritualism, which was actually pretty prevalent in the 1920s. And I think that's one of the strongest points in this book was her ties to the historical setting. Her writing of it was just so immersive and atmospheric and fantastically done. It really made you feel like you were in 1920s New York. With that, highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator did a fantastic job with different voices for every single character, which was truly impressive. Plus just the kind of accents she would give them that sound old-timey and actually seems like she was from the 1920s. Although I did mention previously that I wasn't the biggest fan of Evie, and personally Theta and Sam were my preferred characters. Across the board though, I loved all the moxie we saw from all these different characters in their own ways, whether it be big or small. I think that'll make them all the more interesting to follow in the coming stories. However, I can see that a love triangle is developing, and I don't really like that trope. It's very rare that I enjoy it being used. Who knows, maybe Libba Bray will do it well. I much more preferred a different romance subplot that was taking place because it was fairly minimal and didn't really detract from the main plot, whereas I think this love triangle can develop into something a lot more dramatic in the coming books that will possibly take away from the mystery aspect. I think the latter half of the book really did pick up from where we had started off, and so with that, I think I'm gonna give this a 4 stars. I did really enjoy the writing, I loved the setting, I loved the plot. I'm so hooked by that. We'll see how my feelings towards the characters change in the future. Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point in Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, and I am loving this so far. First, obviously this has tons of LGBT rep in it and it has own voices. I really appreciated how Aiden Thomas has tied in all of these different aspects that come with being a trans individual into this story. Big ones like acceptance and having your dead name dropped and being misgendered, but also little ones. For example, we see Yadriel's struggles with their wardrobe, with the confidence in their haircut. using a binder and trying to get accustomed to that feeling. Another serious topic that's been discussed is the issues of homeless teens and them being labeled as runaways, particularly when something bad happens to them because they live a high-risk lifestyle. This is a big topic in the true crime community. However, on the more positive sides, I am loving the characters in this. Although Yadriel is struggling to earn his family's acceptance as a boy and a brujo, I really love that he has a supportive uncle who kind of can relate to him when it comes to his struggles with becoming a brujo. His best friend Maritza is so supportive. I am just totally loving Julian because he just fits that chaotic good character, but he's trying so hard to be a bad boy. But you can tell on the inside he's a sweet cinnamon roll, particularly in some of the little gestures he does towards Yadriel that just, oh, they make my heart so happy. Having seen some more of the brujeria culture that Aiden Thomas has set up in this, I really appreciate how they have highlighted how this comes from so many different Latinx cultures and countries and tied that in with some of the characters and their families and highlighting that they are multicultural. I also really appreciate Aiden Thomas's use of Spanish in the story. When a piece of dialogue will be dropped, it's not directly translated in the next line, which makes it feel all the more authentic. And they do interweave different clues and items that allow you to figure out what is being said. It's also giving me a chance to shake off my rusty Spanish skills because it's been 3 years since I've taken a Spanish class. This is also just an odd little tidbit, but Maritza's family has these 2 pit bulls that look scary and terrifying, and they're called the boys, but in reality, they're super sweet and adorable, and that makes me so happy because I love pit bulls. Plus, on top of that, they're named Donatello and Michelangelo, and Julian's response is, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? And Maritza goes, no, like the Renaissance artists. And I just loved that exchange so much because my brain would have done the exact same thing as Julian's. If you couldn't tell, I've been really enjoying the story. The atmosphere is just perfect for fall, especially since Yadriel's family lives in a cemetery. There's so many mentions of preparing for a Day of the Dead. I don't want to set my estimated rating as 5 stars just because I don't want to put my expectations too high, but I am really enjoying this, so I'm gonna say 4 stars. I'm already assuming I may give this higher than that. Hey y'all, so I have officially finished Cemetery Boys, and this book was so good. This was just fun and sweet and just an overall such an enjoyable read. I really loved this. I cried, I laughed, I squealed. I just had so many different emotions. This was so fun. I loved this book so much. Our main character in this, Yadriel, is just such an underdog. He's so selfless and resilient. You can't help but like him and want to cheer for him to succeed. While on the opposite side, Julian is hard-headed and tough and kind of mean, but in the end, he really just cares so much for the people around him. He's such a big softie on the inside. My favorite kind of character, in all honesty. This was a perfect read, particularly for around Halloween time and Dia de los Muertos. I loved the tie-ins to so many different Latinx cultures in this. It was fascinating to see how Aiden Thomas had set up this brujeria system. This was just heartfelt, and the ending climax was stressing me out. The final epilogue was, oh, I couldn't stop smiling, and that time when I cried, they were happy tears. It was just so precious. Oh, I really loved it. I will say, however, that this is marked on Goodreads as a YA fantasy, and that was kind of how it was marketed to me. Personally, however, I think it should be more labeled as a YA contemporary with fantasy elements. This is so much more focused on Yadriel trying to find acceptance within his community and his family, trying to become comfortable in his own skin, and as well as the relationship between our 2 main characters, which is developed over time. I think the fantasy mystery that was sort of taking place is more of a subplot, and the focus is really that on Yadriel and Julian. I am not complaining though. It was so good. I can't wait to reread this and just fall back in love with these characters. It was fantastic. I tabbed it up a ton. Overall, I just enjoyed the entire ride. Every time I picked this up, I was so happy and loving every word I was reading. Was it perfect? No, but it was so enjoyable and I loved every second of it. So naturally, I have to give it 5 stars. I'm not surprised at all. Hey y'all, so I've officially hit the halfway point in Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and this has been very slow burn. We've spent a lot of time developing suspense and intrigue around the mystery, as well as just suspicion of the entire Doyle family. While I do believe that has been done really well, I think my preferred portion of the writing has really been the vivid imagery and how well the setting has been created. Moreno Garcia's writing really makes you feel like you were in this haunted house on a creepy hill in a small town in Mexico with a cemetery and a overgrown greenhouse and an entire family of people you don't know if you can trust. I also really like how she has done some tie-ins to the historical aspects as well as the cultural, because again, are set in a small town in Mexico, which I think was a really interesting and well done choice because it kind of modernizes that whole Gothic haunted house story we've seen time and time again. The story so far has been very reminiscent to me of both Rebecca and Wuthering Heights. Our main character, Noemi, who is a very feminist protagonist. She's strong-willed, she's independent, she's selfish, and she's kind of okay with it, but she cares a great deal about her cousin Catalina. However, excluding Noemi, I think some of the other characters have fallen into the trap of becoming Gothic archetypes. So Catalina is very much the innocent, while on the opposite side, her husband Virgil is really reminiscent of Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights. He puts on this whole facade of being a gentleman, of being very prim and proper, but when we see beneath it, he's downright scary, and personally, I would not want to be alone with him. Some of the conversations Noemi has had with him would have me running from the room. His father, the patriarch of the family, is very much the same way, and he had this really uncomfortable conversation with Noemi about eugenics, and it was weird. However, one character I am intrigued by is Florence, who I think could be kind of a foil to Noemi. They do have similar characteristics, but I do believe Florence is supposed to be the kind of older, witchy female character in Gothic stories who is very obedient to her father and is focused on trying to uphold her family and their values and their household, where Noemi is much more selfish and pushes back against them and isn't afraid to stand up to them. There's also Francis, who is Florence's son, and I don't know how to feel about him yet, if I'm being honest. While I have been really enjoying this, I'm still not really sure on where the story's going. Saying that, but who knows, I could find the answer in the end and realize oh, she gave me so many clues previously and I just wasn't paying attention. Is the house really haunted? What's up with all these creepy mushrooms? Or is the Doyle's father to blame? Because honestly, I'd believe it. Currently, I think I'm gonna go with 3.5 stars on this one. I am enjoying it, but I'm a little worried we had too much buildup and the ending won't be as satisfying. Hey y'all, so I have finished Mexican Gothic and this was weird. I know I said in the last clip that I wasn't really sure where the story was heading, but oh my gosh, Silvia Moreno Garcia constructed it in such a fantastic way. Was there a ton of buildup? Yes. Do I think it paid off? Also yes. In the end, almost all of the questions I had were tied together and answered in this really freaky and unsettling way that made the horror so much different from that of The Only Good Indians, where that was very much more gory. This was a lot more psychological and bringing up a bunch of taboo subjects that make you feel uncomfortable in a very different kind of way. I really enjoyed the latter half of this. At one point I was listening to the audiobook in my car and I remember curling in on myself. It was so freaky that I wanted to turn it off, but at the same time I didn't because I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I really loved Noemi. She was so sassy, so snarky, was like, I don't like you, and I'm gonna let you know it. I actually ended up really enjoying Francis. While I was pretty skeptical of him in the beginning, he had a very interesting character arc, and in the end, I think he might have actually been my favorite character. He developed pretty well. I've also learned, once again, always do the double tap. Always. I think in the end, I'm going to be giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I do think the ending climax was a hair rushed. I would have liked it to be a bit more dragged out, but the answer we got was just crazy. So I was kind of focused on that bit. Finally, I want to give a little shout out to Lou from Lou Reading Things, and she did a fantastic review and analysis of Mexican Gothic, which I'm going to link the video in the cards up above. Definitely go watch it if you have read this. It will make you rethink so many things in this story in a new light. Hello, my loves. So I have officially finished Monstress by Marjorie and Lou, and I kind of like this. It was okay. One of my favorite parts was definitely the art. This was super steampunk meets like Asia with occasional like Egyptian influences. I really liked this, and I'm realizing I very much enjoy Sana Takeda's art style. It's pretty reminiscent of manga, but like more realistic styled manga. The world building in this was really interesting. There were the Arcanics, which are descendants of gods, I believe, and they have different markers that kind of showcase them as such. And these can showcase in different ways. For one of our main characters, Kippa, she is actually a descendant from a fox. So she has like fox ears and a tail, but other people look more fox-esque than she does. She looks fairly human except for her ears and tail, whereas some actually have like snouts or full bodies of fur and different things like that. There are also the humans, which look like humans, I know you're shocked, and the Kumeyas, which are the sorceresses, and they look pretty human as well. But there's also cats who are necromancers and also often poets, and they are the ones who kind of relay the history of this world. These cats also have multiple tails, and I'm not sure, but I think the more tails they have, the more powerful they are. My other guess is that the amount of tails they have is how many lives they have left, because you know, cats have 9 lives. One thing I really loved with the world building is this is a matriarchal society, so women are often the rulers, and with that there would be little tidbits that would get dropped in that would remind us of this, such as instead of saying oh my god, it would be oh my goddess. Instead of mother it was father, which I found hilarious. In that same vein, female-female relationships were really normal, and I thought that was interesting. We saw a good few of those. As much as I was interested in the world building for this, the plot was kind of confusing. We get dropped in the middle of the story and not a lot gets explained, except when it comes to the end of an issue. We will kind of have an info dump session, say perhaps a plot point or a new group of people that has been introduced, a new political aspect that has come up, different things like that. It always comes at a point too late where I've spent the entirety of the issue being confused on what the heck is now happening, and then suddenly it all gets explained to me and I have to sit there for like 5 minutes and pinpoint the different things and connect them to what I've just learned. The main plot itself is focused on Micah, I still don't really know how to pronounce her name if I'm being honest, and her psychic connection with this monster and trying to find her family in order to understand where she comes from. That was well done, but it ties into so many different side plots that are political and tied in to the history, which just made it all the more confusing. The characters were fine. I don't think there was anyone in particular I really connected with. I did like Ren, who was one of the necromancer cats that has been working with Micah. We don't know what his underlying intentions are, so he's kind of like a gray character, which I liked that. And he's sassy, and I always appreciate some snark. The little girl, Kippa, who Micah saves in the beginning of the book, is adorable, but while there were definitely some flashback scenes that allowed us to sympathize with Micah, overall, she was a pretty brash, hard personality, trying to think of not mean words, but she has lived a very hard life, so it's kind of understandable she is the way she is. So in the end, I liked this. I'm intrigued by the world. The art was absolutely gorgeous, but the plot was pretty convoluted and it was really hard at times to keep track of what was happening. It just really took away from my enjoyment overall. I did learn when I finished this that there's a glossary at the end of the book, which would have come in handy, but I was reading this in an ebook format, so it wouldn't have been easy to kind of flip back and forth anyway. I think if I had read this in physical form, that would have been really helpful and probably would have helped me keep track of certain plots a lot more easily. So in the end, I think I'm gonna give this 3 stars. I also just don't think I'm gonna be continuing the series, which is a shame because I was intrigued, but it just took some mental gymnastics to kind of follow what was happening at times, and I wasn't a big fan of that. All right, y'all, so this is like the perfect end screen because there's a haunted house poster, and this was my Halloween 5x5, so I planned that. Definitely. All right, y'all, so as always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Bye.